Hello, once again it's another episode of the Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers. My name's Mark Miller. Today's a little bit more serious. This isn't about writing per se. This has to do with the fact of a very serious subject we're running into more every day, and it has to do with human trafficking and the victims of human trafficking and sexual exploitation. And the reason that I got interested in that is because when I was a senior special agent, we were involved in prosecutions along those lines and everything. So I wound up writing a little series of books based on my experience as a federal agent. But the other day at Bremerton Rotary, I bumped into Rosie Garbe, which is part of, I'm going to kill the name again.
Scarlet Road.
Scarlet Road. You ever notice how you always have like a block about a name? For some reason I can't remember Scarlet Road, which is horribly unprofessional of me. But anyways, Scarlet Road's an organization that deals with victims of human trafficking, sexual exploitation, sexual abuse, and all those not so nice subjects. So I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, and that's why I wanted to have this, because I have a chance to get a little bit on the soapbox. And that's why I wrote fictionalized books based on my experiences. But you deal with the reality every single day. I'm retired now. I don't deal with those realities. So tell me how you got started with the Scarlet Road.
Yeah, so Scarlet Road has been around for about 16 years now. We first began to formulate in 2008. I think, and it was really, I think, in response to a need that we saw in our community that was being unmet. So personally, I had experience working in human trafficking, in social services, both overseas and in the United States. And it was sort of as a result of my education, my master's degree, when I was getting a master's in international relations and diplomacy.
Oh.
And so we started talking about, it was in 2005, and that was really when the conversation around international trafficking started to come to the surface in the United States. And so that was my first walk into exploitation and trafficking. And I started to work overseas in Lebanon and then in Thailand. And when I was in Thailand, it's really where I started to understand the gravity of sexual exploitation and human trafficking. And so from there, I landed back in Kitsap County a few years later and got together with several of our other founders and really started to ask the question and be in response to a frustration that no one understood the terminology, no one understood the issue in our community, and no one was serving this population in our community. And so it was out of that there was 3 founders, and then eventually our founding board, that we really started to ask really hard questions of our community and listen to survivors in our community to try to understand how to serve them well, why they weren't being successful in traditional social services, and what we needed to do to serve them well as a community. And so that launched us into starting Scarlet Road more formally. And we didn't actually set out to create an organization. Yeah. We really just started asking hard questions, and it pushed us into a conviction that we needed to, as a community, address this.
And something I don't think most people realize right now, of course, it's all focused on the southwest border and all these people coming across. Now I'm finding out they're not coming just from Spanish-speaking countries. They're coming from all over the world because they can. And there's organizations called Nautical Traficantes. They have billions to trillions of dollars because of the illegal drugs trade. They are now doing the human trafficking because they can make more money.
Absolutely.
Which is bizarre.
The industry thrives off of money and resources, right? The reason that it is around is because it's lucrative and there's a demand for it. So at Scarlet Road, we do serve some internationals, but we primarily serve local people from our community who have been exploited through the sex trade. So I think that's a real big shocker for people, actually, that it's our community members, it's our children, it's our nieces, our nephews, kids in our schools that are actually being sold for sex.
Yeah, and I think that is the problem. And part of the other things that we did, Homeland Security, is we had a cybersecurity group, and they dealt with, unfortunately, which had a tendency of scarring people, having to do this for long terms. They dealt with child pornography through the internet. We had one, he's retired now, he was an agent. He'd been an agent for years involving with, back in the day when we had different pornography laws and stuff like that, and it was run at that time literally by the traditional mafia. Well, then all of a sudden this whole child trafficking thing came in. So his name was Daryl Cosme, and he retired before I retired, but he was a legend, and I think he's still used as a professional witness on certain cases, because he could literally look at a series of photos and say, those photos are of such and such a person 20 years ago when they were only 7 years old, and that's part of such and such a collection. And we've identified the people, the victims being actual people. We've located them, they're still alive. And so they use that as a means to hammer people that are still trafficking in the images.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's part of, like I said, the exploitation and the human trafficking idea.
Yeah, we have had many survivors who have had a combination of in-person and online trafficking. And the further into technology advancements that we have gotten over the last 20 years, the more aggressive we see online exploitation becoming. It is just out of control. And it's so hard to regulate, and it's so hard to even to police and to prosecute, right? Now that everything's offshore. And I mean, it's ridiculous, but it is a huge problem within our youth communities.
And thanks to the internet, used to be that all it was videos and film. Now the internet, of course, you can transfer the images in a blink of the eye. And then you get a lot of even young junior high school kids who think it's funny to take nude photos themselves, and then they share it, and before you know it's on the internet. And they don't realize that if you're transferring those photos to somebody else, you have just committed a crime, because you're an underage person showing nude and sexual explicit photos. You're like 15 years old. You think it's a joke. Yeah. It isn't.
Yeah. That's one of the things that's really interesting. So we teach at Scarlet Road, we teach a youth curriculum in our school systems across Kitsap County. And that's one of the things we talk about in that curriculum is the fact that when kids are sharing this content, that they are actually committing a crime. Yeah. They have no idea. No one's telling them these things. They until we are in those classrooms with those kids, they literally have no clue that of the ramifications.
Right.
On so many levels, right? There's the legal ramifications, but there's also just the fact that as soon as you share that image, it's never coming back. You could never get a hold of it again in most cases, right?
Once it's on the internet, that's what people understand. Once you put something on the internet, it never really goes away. Somebody is eventually going to find it.
Yeah.
You know, you said you spent some time in Thailand.
Did.
And of course, at one time, that was the basket case for sexual trafficking, especially of kids.
Yeah. So I lived in Bangkok and worked with an organization there, and then I also lived in Pattaya and worked with an organization there. And both are well known for sex tourism.
Right.
And in the Bangkok district that I was in, the majority of the trafficking victims that were there were local Thai.
Right.
However, when I lived in Pattaya, they had a really huge international trafficking racket going through. So there were individuals from Eastern Europe, there were individuals from Africa, there were individuals all from all parts of the world that were getting trafficked through Pattaya.
And when you say through, I know that some of them would stay in Thailand, but where would they then go? I mean, what other countries would they sometimes send the people to?
I mean, I think it kind of depended on the ring that they were connected with.
Okay.
So there was, I think it really just depended. We had a lot of individuals that came through Guam into Thailand, and then occasionally out into even more oppression. But I think that Thailand was often a destination that came through a period of stops.
Yeah, simply because it, at one time, like you said, was Thailand almost invented sex
tourism.
Sex tourism. I mean, for years that was the place to go, and that's where the dirty old men would go, and they would find a little 14-year-old, boy or girl.
Yep.
This is unfortunately this is an equal opportunity crime.
It is, and I am grateful for you touching on that, actually, because I think that most of the time there is an assumption that it is only women who fall victim to human trafficking, and the the data is poor because we don't ask the question, right, about men and boys being exploited. But it's a huge issue. We, at Scarlet Road, we opened up serving our long-term case management aftercare program services to men last year in 2023. And in that 1 year, we served almost 40 individuals.
Men have a tendency of not wanting to admit to it because they think they then see themselves as weak victims. If you're 10, 12 years old and you're a young boy and you're being abused, you're not weak. You're a victim. Okay? And I think that's one of the biggest problems. I dealt in the prison system. There were, of course, young inmates, convicts who were sexually abused in prison. They don't want to talk about it because, once again, then they are seen there as young, weak victims. Are seen, oh, we're a punk.
Yeah.
And so men don't want to come forward, even if things happen to them as a young boy. You see it on a lot of it's actually coming out more and more in TV shows like Law and Order SVU, Sexual Victims Unit, and things like that, where they actually are looking at that that part of sexual trafficking, that part of the whole sexual abuse environment.
Yeah, I mean, we have a really big social issue around that, right? Like, our society doesn't tell men that it's okay to be victimized, right? To speak up around that, to get help even, right? And most of the services out there are kind of tailored towards female populations.
Yeah.
That's slowly changing, I think. But I think a lot of the time men don't even know that they can come forward, right? That there's even services available for them. There's just assumptions that, there's only services available for female populations.
Well, yeah, like you said, but that's what's been, I guess, accentuated. That's what people have been paid more attention to. I've got a few little vignette horror stories in my law enforcement career. When I was in the Air Force, I remember I was in Okinawa and we got a phone call at the law enforcement desk at Kadena Air Force Base. And there was some young guy and he says, hey, I was down on Gate 2 Street and I got attacked in the alley and raped, and have bleeding, et cetera, I could go into graphics. And we're trying to get him to come in. I'm sitting here, standing here while the desk sergeant is talking to him, and he says, "Hey, man, come on in. Where you at?" Well, I'm at the barracks, and I don't want to talk about it. So he hangs up. So we run over to the barracks, and we find some blood in the shower and stuff like that. So we know what happened. Whatever happened to that young troop, we don't know, because he was afraid once again to come forward. This is 1979, 1980. When it had to do with that. When I was in Border Patrol, we had a checkpoint down by Yuma, Arizona. And one day there was this vehicle came through, and there were these two, there were Mexicans come through, and they had a young lady in the back. And the Border Patrol agent, Wayne Atwell, who was the senior agent, he sensed there was something wrong, so we secondaried him. We go in, so we got him in the secondary and separated the girl from the two guys. Find out these two guys are illegal aliens. They had picked her up on the street in, I can't remember, San Diego or LA. They forced her in the car, and they were driving all the way in from California, and we caught them at Yuma, which is on the border of Arizona and California. So we start trying to get somebody interested in it. Okay. Because of the family shame, we're talking 1985, the family shame, they didn't want to push it. The local sheriff didn't want to push it, because even though part of the crime was in Arizona, it started in California. We called the FBI. The FBI didn't want to do anything with it, once again, because they didn't want to have to push in the family. So that poor woman, once again, is ignored, because everybody worries about the shame factor rather than taking care of the situation.
I think that fear, shame, and broken systems are one of those three elements keep this issue from properly moving forward. And there's a lot of other barriers, right? But those three barriers are huge factors in preventing us from really putting a cap on this industry. And I think create their own environment of control that paralyze survivors and that paralyze those trying to police this issue, and even us when we're trying to get help for survivors, right? When we're trying to provide solutions, it's so easy to hit a brick wall because of those things on either end of the spectrum, whether you're working with a survivor or working with a system. We find ourselves beating our heads up against a wall all the time and pushing way harder than anybody else to try to figure out a solution, because those are the barriers that we're constantly coming up against. So it's really interesting that you pinpoint those.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think they've been going on for a really long time, and they still are there.
They have. And it's, 20, 30 years ago, they finally decided that you couldn't, if a woman charged somebody with rape, you can no longer bring up the fact that, she had sexual relation with this guy over here too. There used to be, that's what the defense would come in. And so that way they would try to get a plea agreement. It's probably the sex offender list now that we have in the federal government, and also I think all the states have it now. That didn't exist not that long ago. Once you got out of prison for rape, they didn't put you on any type of tracking system. When I got out from the federal government, I had a chance to work with Washington State Community Corrections, and I was in a sex offender unit, so I got a chance to talk to a lot of the sex offenders. And you had the serial pedophiles, and then you had the guy that had sex with his 15-year-old girlfriend, and they dump everybody together. So that skewers the statistics, and it skewers trying to deal with the problem.
Yeah. But I mean, that's a good example of broken system.
Yeah,
right? That people are more complex than a system.
Exactly. And I think that's one reason why I want to have you here is like I said, this is a serious subject. It's not fun and getting to all look at the book and all this other jazz. We're having fun. And I don't think people realize it enough of what's going on in your community. You should kind of keep an eye out. We don't want you to be a Karen and run up and scream at people, stuff like that. But if you see something going on, you need to go talk to somebody. I remember when I was working in El Paso, we were out at the firing range, which is right next to Fort Bliss. This is 2000 and about 1999 or something. We're out at the range, and all of a sudden this Hispanic woman walks in from the desert. She's all disheveled and stuff. And the guy I was with, David Earl, who's passed since then, we started asking her questions, and he said, yeah, she's been raped and dumped out here by probably a GI or something. So we had to call the local police to come out and get her and stuff like that. What would happen to her? I don't know. Probably very little once again, because like you said, that the system's broke, and we're talking 1999, so it's not even as well developed as it is now. You know?
Yeah. I mean, our systems have over the last 25 years really changed as far as how we address and how we understand human trafficking, sexual exploitation.
Yeah.
You know, in the 90s, we were still very much criminalizing the victim when
Right.
it comes to exploitation and prostitution. And,
Oh, yeah.
Right? That's how we understood how to deal with the situation, which was clearly not helpful. But
Right.
that's the heels that we were coming off of. And now, for the most part, our law enforcement, our prosecutor system, especially in Kitsap County, right, has really taken a new approach to say, we really understand that this is a victim that we're working with, that this is a survivor who needs support. And so the heart, I think, really is that there is a desire to be able to figure out that appropriate pathway for supporting that individual. Now, I think it still is complicated, though, because many survivors have a lot of other barriers or criminalities that are intersecting with their environment or their situation, right? Many of the survivors that we work with have a criminal history.
Right.
They have assault, or they have drugs, or they have any number of complications within the legal system, which make it complicated or more complicated for law enforcement to address well. And it requires more time of law enforcement to really be able to sit down with a victim and hear what they're saying, create a space where they feel safe.
So how would somebody get a hold of Scarlet Road and you if they had some concern or was reaching out for some help?
Yeah, so the easiest way is either to look us up online at scarletroad.org, and I'll give you the link. You can.
Okay, we can put it on.
Yeah, you can put it up. Or to just call us directly. Our office phone number is 360-850-9718.
Okay.
And we have a survivor hotline that survivors can call directly through that line, or that community members can call and ask us questions. Like you said, it's happening in our community. We want people to not be afraid to report or to get somebody help. And so one of the best things that our advocates can do is just help walk community members through that. Whether that's a teacher or a social service provider or a neighbor or somebody else who might have concerns, call us, call our hotline and say, hey, this weird thing makes me feel uneasy.
Yeah.
Should I be concerned about it?
Well, I want to thank you for willing to come here today so we could get some word out some more. Like I said, normally we're dealing with happy-go-lucky authors and stuff like that, but I wanted to get you because of my experience and, of course, the experience in the fictional world also, but we're trying to make it as realistic as possible at the same time so people can realize we may write a detective thriller about that, but it's based on what's actually going on. And you're actually dealing with the actual reality day to day. So I want to thank you very much for coming here today.
Thank you, Mark.
And that's going to end this segment of the Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers. We do have a group that meets twice a month that we actually help with writers and other creatives. But of course, this episode here had to do much more with a more serious subject matter. So if you have anything, any more information, we'll put up the phone number and everything for Scarlet Road. on the bottom of the tape and everything, or you can just go ahead. You can get a hold of me through Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers, and I'll run you over to them and everything. Sexual abuse, sexual trafficking is a problem, and we need to deal with it as a community rather than just as individuals. And with that, I'd like to hopefully have everybody have a much more productive day and have a nice tomorrow. This show will be broadcast on Astound Wave Cable Channel 3 and also on Comcast Channel 12 Saturday night at 6 p.m. once we have it all edited and everything. So watch for that show. You have a very nice day and a pleasant tomorrow. This is Mark Miller. Thank you.